I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
DaveyD, Hard Knock Radio, hanging out with you this afternoon. As always, which has been a tradition of this show, we like to start off the new year by cleaning house, setting a tone for the year, and directing people towards vessels of truth. A lot of people in the last week or so have been talking about Cat Williams, who came on and did an interview, not with us, but with Shannon Sharp, a professional athlete turned broadcaster. And he cleared the house, set the tone for the year by blowing the whistle on the entertainment industry, the comedy industry, and, just have people saying, this is the year where things get exposed. Way before Cat Williams did that conversation, Jared Ball, who is our guest this afternoon, has been involved in pitched battles with a number of luminaries around his book, which we had him on the show when it first came out. It's called The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, Media, Race, and Economics. It is now on its second edition. And when the book came out, we had you on, you talked a little bit about it, and you bust some myth. And now you're busting myths again around the propaganda of Black buying power. But this time you've been stepping on toes of an industry and people within that industry who have literally made a living off of selling to Black people in particular the notion that we can turn around our poverty and the challenges that we have economically by simply buying Black. And so I wanted to bring you back on the show and talk a little bit about those battles, where the lines in the sand are drawing, and celebrate the second edition of this book and let you double down and really explain. Among the luminaries who have come after you, you have Dr. Boyce Watkins, who has traveled the country. He has a PhD in finance, and he even says, I have a PhD in finance, and kind of challenge you, Jared. Like, what do you really know based upon his vast knowledge of this subject? And you caught the angst and anger of Willie D of the Ghetto Boys, who not only called you a bunch of names, but suggested that you went to school and came back with no knowledge of Black economics. And he was kind of checked by a lot of people who have read your book. But I wanted to kind of have you come on and let's talk a little bit about that and remind people in the year 2024 why it is a propaganda and why it is a myth about Black buying power. So welcome to the show and Happy New Year.
No, likewise, Davey. It's always a pleasure, and I appreciate always the opportunity to build with you. So again, just quickly, the short of it is my argument, and I think beyond just a belief or even just an argument, I feel has been well demonstrated, and I welcome attempts, honest and good faith attempts by people to engage the work and to see to the extent that they don't feel I've proven the case. But essentially, my argument is that buying power, as we conventionally know it, is a marketing and advertising mechanism designed to help advertisers target ad revenue, and has been misinterpreted. And to whatever extent this is by design, we could discuss, debate, as a solution to Black economic inequality. And what I've tried to show is the history of the myth more as a tool of propaganda or psychological warfare waged by the political elite of this country against Black people, as a mechanism to move Black people and redefine concepts of power and Black power away from radical analysis and organization and attempts at political power, and to replace all of that with these false notions of capitalism and Black capitalism as steps that need to be taken, at least initially, as we're told, before we can get into the political arena. So I've just tried to show that that's not real. So what has been happening lately, and specifically, and shout out to Black Men Build, They invited me to a discussion in Baltimore a couple months ago or a month ago, and which was taped in full, posted in full, but as most do, clipped and put on social media. And in a handful of, really just two, I think, 90-second clips, which for me, relative for me, that is Jared, have gone viral and gotten a lot of response. And one of the clips has me saying essentially that Black people don't have any money and therefore can't turn that money into the kind of business strength and economic strength that we're told that we can. And with that clip, people like Willie D and Boyce Watkins and Tori Russell most recently, and
Troy
people I've
Russell
worked
from
with
Ferguson.
from Ferguson. He came out saying he was talking, I would argue, recklessly and wild as well. Uh, but my point is, Tory claims to actually have read the book. I don't know to what extent that's true. Nothing he has said publicly suggests that. But others will, like Boyce and Willie, will acknowledge, I haven't read the book. I've only seen this clip. And based on that clip, Jared is anything from wild, inappropriate names to just wrong. And part of what I've been arguing with the book is that this is how propaganda works. It is the messaging and the narrative that has taken hold, and people do not investigate, do not follow up, do not even look into the origins of the claims around buying power, which I show in the book, and just accept them as they have been misinterpreted and presented and defined. So that's one thing. So when Boyce comes out and says, for instance, that he has a PhD in economics and is therefore to be taken as an expert, on one level, he is at least right in that I do not have a PhD in economics. My PhD is in media studies with a graduate degree in Africana studies. But that's what I say in the book, and which is why I've invited him to actually read it before commenting on it. As I explain in the book, most of my argument is not around an argument of economics. It's an argument around media, Africana studies, narrative, propaganda, which is in my area of expertise. The economics, I rely on the work of other economic researchers, PhDs, scholars, et cetera, including Dr. Derek Hamilton, who wrote the foreword to the second edition. And I rely on their reporting, and then I comment and sort of aggregate, interpret, and comment on their work, and show in particular how the commercial Black press and scholars like Boyce have avoided that work and have accepted the propagandized, propagated narrative around buying power, which is itself false. And I've included, by the way, and I'll stop here, for people like Boyce, that who would know if they actually, two quick, if I can, quick points on that. Right. One, within any PhD, with any field, there are subfields of expertise. So having a PhD in economics does not automatically guarantee you would be an expert in every sub-related field or discussion with it that involves economics. Right. So that's one thing. And having looked at Boyce's PhD, his dissertation a little bit, and there's nothing in there that would suggest he is competent to discuss what I'm discussing. But second to that, he would also then be aware, if he had done the research as a scholar, as I have done in this case, that people who discuss economics, in particular inequality and oppressive conditions, none of them use buying power as a category to assess the conditions of a community or to assess the potential for that community to change those conditions. It's not done because, as I've shown in my work, buying power is itself not necessarily an economic category, it's a marketing category. Right. So it stands to reason that he would not be that his doctorate would not be relevant here. But the real point, though, is a scholar of any field, within any field, the basic steps would require investigating the claims, investigating the research, investigating the work before commenting. So to openly acknowledge, I have not read Jared's book, but he's wrong, but to conclude that he's wrong is itself unscholarly. It's anti-intellectual. So so regardless of the field of the discipline of the degree, that behavior methodologically is flawed and does a disservice to his not only my work but to his audience.
Dr. Jared Ball is with us this afternoon, and you said a lot of things that raise a number of questions, some of which are disturbing. So let's put the book on hold for a minute and let's put on our media hats. These are areas of expertise that both of us share, and in many ways, this is the premise of your book. The fact that a 30-second or 90-second clip can be sent around out of an hour and a half conversation where you go in deep and lead to people drawing sharp conclusions and then getting on their own platforms and amplifying rhetoric, some of which is pretty offensive. You know, you were called the N-word, a coon, all types of things by Willie D, who I actually like and know, and Boyce Watkins, pretty much, using his prestige and platform, ran with this, as did a number of other people. And so I wanted to stop and just look at the power of framing narratives, 30-second, 90-second sound bites, and what that has done to not Black people, but the country in general. It has allowed, in my opinion, a lot of misinformation to go about. It's been about performance and how you say certain things versus the depth of it. So if I say it real loud, if I got up here and said, Jared's a fool and Jared's a dummy and Jared's this, that, and the other, people will remember me being animated and calling you names versus whether or not I actually said something of substance. And the reason why I bring this up is because we're on the precipice of maybe seeing this country go in a completely different direction, where democracy is removed, really based around the sound clips of very powerful people. The amplification of your Donald Trumps and, Ron DeSantis's and others have really captured the imagination and the emotion of people who then act upon sound clips and misinformation. So let's talk a little bit about that, and then we can dive in to the premise of the book and in the premise of the Black buying power, because it's a media phenomenon more than it is an economically sound, researched type of strategy. But if you can put on your media hat and let's talk about propaganda and how it's playing out at this very moment.
So just to be clear, I do think the argument I make economically, the book is strong and well researched. It's just not the primary focus of my argument. Right. And as I've been saying to my classes lately, I do think we are in a civilizational crisis moment as it regards methodology. That too much is being said by too many with too little information on too many topics. So this is the worst I've ever experienced. I've been making this argument around buying power publicly since 2008, and but this clip, having again relatively for me gone viral, has introduced me to a new level of people looking at my phone number and contacting me, of sending me all kinds of DMs, and overwhelmingly, in fact, I'm unaware to this day of anybody having actually read the book and then offering up a critique. All of these critiques, which often come with a lot of name calling, are from people who acknowledge, I have not read the book, I've only looked at this. So now, aside from the personal struggles around that, it is speaking to the moment, as you've outlined, that I would argue, if we look carefully at the history of the construction of this media environment, this is largely by design and works in favor of those in power. It helps more than mitigate the potential for new technology and new social media, new media to get the word out, as we would say, for those in oppressive conditions. And as we see writ large in terms of the conflict, which is, again, I hate that I even use that word, in terms of the occupation and the genocide being waged against Palestinians right now, we see that Israel and Zionist forces have openly said, as did Greenblatt of the ADL, we're losing a narrative war. We're losing the propaganda battle around what is happening. So we need to, so there's always been this understanding that messaging, public opinion, the construction of it, the manufacture of it, as Herman and Chomsky famously put it, it has been essential to the political strategy of those in power, because they realize that for a situation where, as we're seeing now, for anywhere from 150 to 190 trillion dollars in wealth, in personal private wealth to be developed just by this country, with that ending up in the hands of less than 1% of the population, they realize that they can only win through narrative efforts. They can't win through logic and honesty, because the rest of us would realize the levels of inequality and exploitation have gone too far.
Well,
so what ends up happening is what we get here. They construct narratives that are more easily plugged into, that there is a material benefit to, for those to support, and then the ideological sensibilities that I think people are just being manipulated, whether it's at a microcosmic level with me and my argument, or at a more macrocosmic level in terms of national, policy and foreign policy in this country and elsewhere.
You mentioned something. I was going to chime in about the economic incentive. I'm just kind of paraphrasing. But the way that social media works, and the way that opinions are amplified in the digital space, requires you to play a game that has really been set forth by Google, and, that's the most powerful search engines, but social media as well, with their algorithms and the way in which things can become amplified. So let me give people an example of what I mean by that. Folks who follow me on social media will say, well, Dave, you make a lot of jokes. You talk about this, that, and the other. Why do you do that? And it's very strategic. It's not that I wake up and I want to be a comedian, but I understand that if I say something about Palestine, which I have, not only have I been shut down, but my comments have been removed, straight up, like, I put it down and I say something and I'll get like a little notice on Instagram, and it goes, you are violating community standards. Your comment is being moved. And then I'm shadow banned, right? And so I don't, if I go to comment on your page before I even finish the sentence, it's removed, right? That has happened in the past. I also know that when a lot of people start to make political statements above and beyond the Palestinian situation, but you want to comment and say you talk about Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis or the current political situation, that will probably get you shadow banned. And for people who don't know, means that you can see your comments, but everybody else can't. So it's a real insidious type of thing. You're thinking people just aren't responding. They're not responding because you're seeing it, but Jared Ball does not, right? And they don't tell you that you're being shadow banned. And so the workarounds is to come along and just have these frivolous conversations. And whenever possible, you try to put a key word in that might connect you. So I may sit up there and say, hey, I'm about to Cat Williams, everybody, and I'm going to blow the whistle on what's going on in the Middle East versus saying Palestine. And the fact that I mentioned Cat Williams will allow me to now be seen by a bunch of people, even though I don't have nothing to do with Cat Williams, but I'm now forced to put a popular word or engage a popular topic to introduce, the 40 or 50,000 people I have following me on some of these platforms to a topic, if that's making sense. So I bring this up to say that there is revenue as well as social currency to be made when, instead of engaging in argument that may be very complex, such as the ones that you laid out in the book, I can go viral real quick by calling you the N word and a bunch of, you're a coon. And lo and behold, you're on the map thanks to Willie D. And so now it's about performance more than it is about substance. So I'm going to get up here and just call you a bunch of names. And I'm going to eviscerate your narrative, with no substance. Say, that sounds like some Johnny come lately stuff. Oh, you're doing the white man's biz, things like that. That's going to be, easy to latch on to. And it moves us away from these meaningful discussions, because even if we do have a meaningful one, these algorithms and Google words or what have you will bury that somewhere. Whereas the controversy of me calling you a name and being bombastic sells. And I'll close with this. That model of being bombastic and loud, even if you're wrong, started in the 80s with your talk shows, when we moved away from the Phil Donahue models and we started to see, your Sally Jesse Raphaels into your Jerry Springers and everybody else. And then we
Morton Downey Jr.
Morton Downing. And then we saw that replicated by your Fox Newses and others, Bill O'Reilly being a leading component. And that became the formula. And so here we are at this moment. And, and I often tell people from the left, it's not about you being right. It's about your performance in public space. And a lot of people, they would go on these shows and get eaten up. And, it's like I had all the facts and figures, but all I remember that Bill O'Reilly smacked you upside the head. And I'll close one more time to the close. The one time that I was on Fox where I went viral, it was because I literally, had a physical altercation with one of the Fox people, if you remember that. That's the thing that went
Actually,
viral.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, the day that Obama gave his speech and Bill O'Reilly sent one of his his camera crew to, they would do these ambush interviews. And I was interviewing Jesse Jackson, and the guy jumped in. It sits online. And it's like, I'm gonna make you the 6 o'clock news. And basically he got punked, and they tried to ignore it and act like it didn't happen, but it went viral on other places, including our network, because it was audio tape. And then a few days later, they chopped it up and then tried to be like, there's a crazy guy that, some leftist radical at the, I'm gonna remember the convention. It was Take Back America convention. And they knew who I was. They just didn't say my name, and they cut it up to try to make me look crazy. But luckily enough, people had saw the beat down. And so they were able to kind of correct the narrative. But that's the thing that carried the day, more than the fact that I was having a serious conversation with somebody who I waited all afternoon to interview. And, here came somebody who just blew up the spot. And the point that I'm making is that becomes the formula: loud, bombastic, name
Why do
calling.
I am sorry that I don't remember that, because I know that I remember all of those, not all, obviously not all, but I remember that as a tactic, becoming very popular. Alex Jones would do that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was the day that Obama gave a speech on race. Around that, it was that day, and I was in DC, and what was crazy, just off the record. I mean, it didn't get recorded. Jesse Jackson took his time coming over, and he whispered in my ear, he goes, "Thanks for putting a foot in the butt of that." And then he made a little joke of that cracker ass cracker, like imitating Chris Rock. And then he goes, "Okay, let's break it up." And then he helped the guy up, and then he thanked me, for what transpired. It's up on YouTube somewhere, But
I'll have to find that. That's crazy. But I mean,
that's the formula. That's the point. That's the formula, is being loud and crazy carries the day, and that's now seeps into politics. And so a Joe Biden compared to a Trump is like, he's more exciting. He's more, even if he's wrong, I'm going to go with the excitement more than I am with the cerebralness. And that was a knock on Obama, you know, just using popular figures, whether we agree with them
Hmm.
politically,
Hmm.
whether
Hmm.
he's too professorial, you
Yeah.
know, versus being as exciting. And people now want the excitement, and you got to bring that. Um, or that's for a sizable population, that's what they're looking for.
No, and I've always admitted to not doing well in those spaces. I've talked openly for years, almost as an instructional method, that my attempts to twice now to debate Michael Eric Dyson have not gone well. In part because of that, not because of the substance, just because of his ability to maintain a certain style and hit a certain tone.
Yeah,
Uh,
he'll rhyme in the middle of a debate, and people remember
he'll
his rhyme,
I
you
mean,
know,
he
even
knows
if
what
he's
he's
wrong.
doing.
Yeah.
And again, that's it. And it's not, and so yeah, I fully understand that. And I get it, but that's why, but I will say, I mean, and I admit it's been weird to feel this naive, to see people that I've known that, that have had ample opportunity to engage, to debate publicly, privately, whatever, to go online and act like Tory Russell said I'm ducking him. I mean, this is somebody who's been on my show, that has my phone number, that ignored my DMs and on Twitter. Like, it's weird. And then doesn't engage and doesn't say, this is what you said on page this, that, and the third, and this is why it's wrong. They never do that. So the disingenuousness, the fakery of it all is shocking to me. I have to admit that. I have to experience it, I should say, is a little bit to study it. This is, classic cliche professor, to study it, to see it happening to others, to see it happening certainly politically with Grant. I mean, that's the point of my work, is like, look at what happens to real analysis and argument. So to make it to sort of finish one point I didn't get to, that I think fits right in with this. What was fascinating about, so first of all, Willie D and Boyce Watkins are friends. They've been, they go to each other's weddings, all this kind of stuff. So when Willie D said all that he had to say, and all the name calling and all of this, and totally misunderstanding my argument, one of the things he put in his comment was that this is something that I probably got from my white teachers in white schools.
That's
And
another
and I was
salacious
thinking,
point, you know.
but what I was thinking was, first of all, what is frustrating is that I don't think I make reference in any meaningful way. I'm trying to think now that I'm thinking about it. In terms of the analysis and the work and the trajectory of the argument I'm making, I don't think there were any whites involved in that. Both in terms of the scholars who I reference in my work, and in terms of the scholars and teachers who actually taught me.
If
So,
if there's any
yeah,
reference to whiteness, it would be in how the myth was born in the first place.
right,
I mean, that's the
exactly.
irony of it, is that the whole black, which I want you to explain for people who don't know, the whole, you know, this whole myth of the black buying power, like we have $1 trillion in the black community that makes us the seventh largest, I'm just paraphrasing, you know, economic engine
Right.
in the world. And if we just buy against each other, then we could get out of poverty, you know, blah, blah, blah. You know, it was the attempt for us to be in white spaces, or at least have access to white income, that bore out the myth. That's what you detail in your book. That's the irony of it.
So that's one part. So,
Yeah.
but I just wanted to quickly shout out the fact that the people that I'm learning from and have learned from come out of the Africana Studies and Research Center under its founding director, the late great Dr. James Turner. They're coming out of the work of the late great Bruce Dixon and Glenn Ford of Black Agenda Report. It's coming out of E. Franklin Frazier and Abram Harris and Du Bois, and even in some lovingly critical back and sort of I guess indirect dialogue with Amos Wilson. It's with Malcolm X and Dr. King. So it's this is a very initially Black discussion that is both being criticized, exposed, and also unfortunately parroted. So that's one thing. The other thing that is a contradiction in that is that on the one hand, Willie will condemn the white institutions that I'm supposed to be connected to, but put his arm around intellectually, if not literally, Dr. Boyce Watkins coming out of Syracuse University, where with his PhD, or at least where he used to teach, and has he proudly promoted coming out of the direct tutelage of a very white economics white male faculty member. Not to the extent that this should matter. I'm not even saying that this should necessarily matter in terms of the work and the analysis and the research, but just to make the point. And then Boyce himself will then say he left the academy so that he could do the real work of teaching his people while charging his people to get misinformation in his classes that instead of doing what some of us would prefer to do, which is use our training and our degrees to get jobs in institutions and use those resources to take to the community for free. So meanwhile also saying I have a doctorate in economics, but I've left the white institution. So you, on the one hand, want the credentials of the white institution to claim the doctorate and the legitimacy, but then you want to claim the legitimacy of Blackness and radicalness by eschewing the academy that gave you that degree and charging the people that you're supposed to be helping instead of giving them the work for free and taking so it's a whole bunch of convoluted nonsense. But the bottom line is ultimately, and then I'll segue from here, is that they're not engaging the work. So whether you are a pundit and podcaster and a legendary rapper, or whether you are a scholar or a journalist or whatever, anyone should initially say, have I read his work? Have I even watched the full presentation? There are literally hundreds of hours online of me talking about this work over the last decade.
Right.
There's 2 editions of the book. The digital version of the first one is free, still freely available. So there's no reason to not read the work. It's not that long. It's not that heavy intellectually. If you still disagree with it, share the critique, and I'm happy to engage. But to your point, the political goal of defending a class position, whether we're talking about a Black bourgeoisie or otherwise, or to defend an individual's celebrity or platforming, or in an effort to claim some legitimacy to your own community or narrow wing of a community or audience, it is much easier to just do as you laid out. Call me some names, misrepresent the argument, reposition yourself as the legit authority, and keep it moving. And at some point, you just have to hope at some point nobody in your audience says, you know what, I'm going to actually read his book.
Let's talk about the book, The Myth and Propaganda, Black Buying Power. So I started off by saying that one of the key things that you talk about in the book is that it was a marketing strategy. Can you give a brief 101 for our audience who hasn't read the book? They should, but can you kind of break that down? Because to me, I think that's probably the most important aspect of this. It's like having an argument about what color the sky is, and you start off your argument by emphatically saying the sky is purple. And we start building narratives around that notion versus, the idea that the sky is actually blue, just to kind of make the point. So if I come in there and I just completely ignore the why this myth was created, then we go down all these different rabbit holes, and then we're trying to fit things into a narrative that didn't make sense in the first place.
Exactly. So again, I'll do it as quickly as I can and encourage people to check the work for more of the details. And then there's much more beyond what I've talked about that needs to be incorporated if we really want to get to the nuts and bolts. But the short of it is that the political elite, the ruling elite in the turn of the 20th century was trying to figure out how to pay workers enough to keep them able to buy the products they're helping to produce, and in so doing, creating wealth for those who own all of that, and but not pay them enough that they don't have to keep working, and to pay them enough so they don't rebel and go on strike. So
Right.
this out of this came the cost of living surveys and studies, and the subset of this eventually emerged this issue of buying power. And buying power was not ever meant to assess an economic strength of a community. It meant the power in that phrase means the power to enrich those who own the products and the processes that produce the products, who own the economy. So they're not looking at a consumer as powerful in the way that we're thinking of it. They're looking at us as our, like, we're batteries. That's where the metaphor of the Matrix was so strong, that we are the batteries. That's the power that they meet. So we wouldn't look at a battery in our whatever and think, oh my God, that is threatening an overthrow. No, we just use it up and then replace it. That's
Right.
how they're looking at it. So then I point to two key moments in the 20th century, in the 50s, with John H. Johnson, the owner of Ebony and Jet, using buying power to work with to work with corporations and the government to basically tell the post-war American rulers, look, Black people are not, we don't want to be threatening. We just want to be good middle-class citizens. And I, as the owner of a Black media outlet, want advertising revenue from corporations. And if we look at all the income of Black people earn $15 billion a year. That's the buying power that we have available for you to spend on your products. So that's where it's so in that sense, it began initially with just this number of, this is all the money Black people are earning. And the corporate world, the white-owned corporate world, was saying, we want all of it. And if we have to pay some Black outlets, some John H. Johnson, if we got to put some ads for our products in Black magazines to get it, so be it. But it was not an assessment of actual economic strength. It was never even an accurate assessment of income. It was never an assessment of wealth. It was never an assessment of the ability to build and expand. It was strictly an assessment of the ability of Black consumers. To what extent could this be used to assess how those spending on ad revenue would spend their dollars? How much do we want to spend on golf bags, advertising our golf bags in this magazine versus our sweaters in this magazine? How, our laundry equipment in this magazine versus our cigarettes on this TV show? That's all that they were trying to assess. In the 70s, this gets plugged into the Black capitalist mythology of Richard Nixon and his whole crew, trying to redefine Black power as Black capitalism, and this notion of, if Black people just get their money right, circulate their dollar, invest in their businesses, and run mainstream electoral political campaigns and support mainstream electoral politicians, they can catch up. Always understanding that this is nonsense, and it was always the goal of moving Black people away. Nixon was just very clear about it, but it was always a part of the goal of saying, move Black people away from the Kwame Ture style definition of Black power and move them into what I want it to be. And what we see today, long story short, is the effects of all of that, with people who are well-platformed, well-funded, to tell Black people, you don't need political organization, you don't need political power, you don't need to understand and critique capitalism, you just need to get your money right. Wealth for the whites has never been developed this way. This is not how any community has ever overturned its unequal conditions, but for you Black people, this is what we want you to do. And there's a handful of Black people who are happy to run that myth. And are funded off of it. And this has been the biggest contradiction for me. I'll stop here, but this has been for me since picking up this work, is that it is a Black commercial media class that is propping up that first layer, because it is receiving the funding. So when I investigated the origins of the myth, to the extent I could find them in its modern form, they're all coming from one source, really, the Selig Center. And the Selig Center is saying in its own work, we don't really know what this buying power number is. This is an estimate, it's a projection. But it's only here to help businesses target their ad revenue. And then it gets promoted and rebranded in Black commercial outlets who are saying, We want that ad revenue. We need that ad revenue.
Right.
Look, and this is not personal, but you can even see it. Before he got into this most recent mess, Diddy was doing it with Revolt. Roland Martin does it with his platform. They get very overt and they say the corporate world isn't advertising with us as they are supposed to. I want that Coca-Cola money. I want that Chevrolet money. And on the one hand, I get it. But what they're doing is misrepresenting as economic strength this buying power figure so that they can tell those white corporations, look, Black people have $1 trillion and they'll spend it on you. Meanwhile, Black people trying to figure out our condition are saying, I got it, we got $1 trillion. We just need to use it better. And A, we don't have that money. And B, we don't have the ability to invest what we do have in areas of the economy, to start businesses in the areas, the sectors of the economy where wealth actually is produced. And then lastly, very lastly, the wealth that is produced, white, Black, or otherwise, keeps ending up in the hand of 1%. So it really doesn't matter. And that's why I keep advocating it shouldn't matter how much is produced. We need to focus on where it goes. And that all of us should benefit, whether we're the champions of business or we're just working every day and doing our thing.
That's the voice of Jared Ball. As you were talking about the manifestation of that myth in the 70s, it reminds me, and you could see those clips of Kwame Ture, then known as Stokely Carmichael, on various programs specifically defining the concept of Black power, right? And then you can find clips around the same time of Richard Nixon defining Black power. And he's like, Black power is green power, right? He had a whole thing. And he said, if we can get that money and woo, 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 and then he rolled with Richard Nixon. Those of us who are students of hip hop, we have to talk about Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan and his infamous memo to Nixon. And if you ever read that memo, what he talks about, he says very specifically, and this is a liberal, Democrat advising Nixon. He says, we need to move away from, I'm just paraphrasing, from coddling the Black militants. Stay away from the Stokely Carmichael. And he says in the memo, start addressing Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Native Americans, and the Black middle class. They're more apt to assimilate. He says that in the memo. You can read that. And Nixon took hold of a lot of that. And pretty soon you had James Brown and others, either endorsing him or riding along with him, talking about, Black economics is the key to freedom. So that's one thing. The other thing that you were talking about with John H. Johnson, which I think this happens around the 50 when he starts to push for this ad revenue. You don't mention it in the book, but there was a group of people that preceded Johnson, and they didn't go to the advertisers themselves because they were they didn't understand this. But advertisers in the music industry in particular went to them, and that was the advent of white teens, the emergence of white teenagers, right? And so when you study the whole evolution of music, and there's a whole ecosystem around it with the Hepcat magazines and all this, they were looking at these white teens as the holy grail. If we can capture that group of people economically, and they use words, they have this much spending power. Well, that spending power was they mommy and daddy's thing, right? So they mommy and daddy has $1 trillion to spend, but we can advertise to them. And then you started to see the shift of how do we capture the white teen market. And, this whole, we could do a whole show just on that. But this comes back to my point and maybe question for you. We know that the white teen market has traditionally and all the way to this day, now we use words like crossover and diversifying and all that to capture that, right? At least in music terms. If teenagers, white teens, were just to spend money with each other, would they be, can you make the same argument that's been made with Black folks? If white teens got together and put their buying power together, would they be okay? Or would it be a situation where are they getting this money from? That's the first thing. Or they're getting it from areas that they don't control. In this case, it's their parents, right? So it's not really their money, but they have the potential to spend that. And they even said that the potential to get the money is there. So if I use that same argument, which predates the myth of the black buying power, but it's an adaptation of that, then it's like we have $1 trillion, but do we have $1 trillion? Or do I have to go to work for some white guy to get that? And that white guy may go, I don't think I want you working here anymore. So then
What
where do
you
I get that $1 trillion then?
No, what you're raising is this is such a brilliant, beautiful, brilliant question, because this is sort of the point. If we look at how buying power is constantly used, it's applied to every group and every municipality and every segment of society all the time, because to the point I'm getting at, and to your point, it's only there for marketing and advertising. It's not an assessment of the actual condition or political or economic strength of a community. So when they're talking about the buying power of white teens between 15 and 18, white girls between 15, white boys, like it gets very, they're not saying that if these white boys and whatever, if these teens circulate their dollar and invest in each other's businesses, they could free themselves from centuries of oppression and overturn conditions of colonization. They're not saying that. They're just simply saying, hey, when we do surveys, white boys right now are spending, X amount on jeans. Let's target our ad revenue and get that jean revenue.
Right.
That's it. And it's only when it comes to Black people has it been weaponized into this. And that's sort of why I talk about the turning points of the 50s, the post-World War II moment, and then the post-Nixon moment. Because these are the point I'm getting at is it's only when it's only weaponized as a political mechanism against Black people. And it's only confused when levied and increasingly, I'm seeing it, I just haven't done the work yet. Increasingly, it is starting to be targeted this way towards Latinos, towards the LGBTQ community, and even in some segments, the disabled community, with the same kind of idea. Like if you all would just get your money right, you could, you wouldn't have to be. But it's really only with Black America that it has been consciously weaponized into as a tactic against our collective uplift. And that's the point. It doesn't account for all the other things that would need to be involved for a community to actually turn whatever wealth they do have into more wealth and into more power. So it doesn't account for some of the things I pointed to, that even you mentioned. It doesn't mean that it doesn't account for where is the money coming from. So if we had to I used this example online the other day. We had to the law in our community that we have to have housing insurance worked to have the housing insurer say, we looked at your roof and you need to have your roof replaced or we can't insure your house. So we had to get the roof replaced. To get the roof replaced, we didn't have the 20 whatever thousand it cost on hand. So they said, no problem. We have an arrangement with Wells Fargo. We'll give you the loan, pay off the roof, and then you pay Wells Fargo back. Now, on paper, this will be on the docket as a Black expenditure of $20,000.
Right.
But it doesn't account for the fact that I got $20,000 only to use on replacing the roof. I can't take that 20 and invest it into a business as if that would, do anything. I can't invest it in stock and flip it. I can't, not legally at least. I have to use it only for the roof. Same thing with cars, with the buying power number doesn't account for the amount people spend on credit, on debt, going into debt. So it's just, they're just saying if Jared goes into Christmas debt buying $10,000 of gifts on his credit card, that's $10,000 in Black buying power. That's not money that I could take and invest anywhere else. That's not $10,000 I have and can flip any way I want. It's $10,000 I've borrowed and gone into debt for, but generated wealth for those who own those things I bought.
We've been talking with Jared Ball, Dr. Jared Ball out of Morgan State, talking about his book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. We're going to continue our conversation tomorrow here on Hard Knock Radio. We have a lot more ground to cover as we kick off the new year. So tune in tomorrow. We'll continue our discussion with Jared Ball. Until then, have a great day. See you later.